I left town for 3 days and came back to find out an entire neighborhood had buried part of their sewer system under my ranch. Not near my ranch. Not beside it. Under it. And by the time everything was over, those same people ended up paying me every single month just to keep their toilets working. Now, if you've never lived in eastern Oklahoma, you might think land disputes are something out of old Western movies. A couple stubborn men arguing over fence lines, maybe a few cows wandering through the wrong gate. But where I come from, land is personal. It's family history. It's memories buried deeper than any property marker. My name's Wade Collins, and my family owned the same ranch outside a little town called Red Creek for almost 70 years. Nothing fancy. About 80 acres of pasture, scattered oak trees, a creek that behaved when it felt like it, and an old barn my grandfather built after returning from the Korean War. Growing up, that ranch was my whole world. I learned how to drive a tractor before I learned algebra. Learned how to mend fences before I could legally drive a truck. Every corner of that property had a story attached to it. My grandfather used to sit on an overturned feed bucket inside the barn and tell me things that didn't make much sense when I was a kid. One thing he repeated over and over was this. People will respect your land right up until respecting it becomes inconvenient. At 8 years old, I thought he was talking about cattle. Turns out he was talking about people. Over the years, Red Creek changed. Developers started buying old farmland and building these polished suburban communities for people who wanted country views without actually living in the country. You know the type. Big entrances with stone signs. Decorative ponds. Perfect sidewalks. HOA newsletters that somehow turned grass cutting into a political issue. About 6 years before all this happened, one of those neighborhoods appeared right beside my property. Maple Ridge Estates. 300 homes squeezed into what used to be grazing land. At first I didn't care. I minded my business. They minded theirs. Or at least that's what I thought. Then the complaints started. One family complained that my horses smelled bad. I remember laughing when I got that one. They're horses. That's kind of part of the package. A month later, another resident claimed my barn lights ruined their evening atmosphere. Then a woman showed up at my gate carrying a tiny dog wearing a sweater that probably cost more than my work boots. She pointed toward my cattle and asked if there was any way I could move them farther away from the property line. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Apparently her kids found the cows intimidating. I told her the cows had lived there longer than any of us and wished her a nice afternoon. Even then, I never had any real problems with Maple Ridge. Annoyances, sure. Nothing serious. At least not until that weekend. I was helping a friend run a livestock auction down near Tulsa. Just 3 days. Before leaving Friday morning, I did what I always did. Checked fences. Filled water troughs. Locked up the equipment shed. Everything looked normal. By Sunday evening, everything had changed. I noticed it before I even reached the house. There were tire tracks cutting through the back section of my property. Huge ones. Not pickup trucks. Heavy machinery. The kind that leaves scars in the ground. My stomach tightened immediately. I parked beside the barn, grabbed a flashlight, and headed toward the back pasture. The farther I walked, the worse it got. Fresh dirt piled in long rows. Bright paint markings sprayed across the grass. Survey flags fluttering in the wind. Then I saw the trench. It stretched across my property like somebody had taken a giant knife and sliced the ranch open. For a few seconds I just stood there staring. The wind was moving through the grass. Everything else was completely silent. I climbed down into the trench and shined my flashlight along the bottom. Fresh excavation. Fresh fill. Fresh work. Somebody had been busy while I was gone. I walked back to the barn, grabbed a shovel, and returned. Part of me already knew what I was about to find. I just didn't want to believe it. A few minutes later the metal blade struck something solid. Clack. I cleared away more dirt. White PVC pipe. Big pipe. Brand new. The kind used for major utility systems. I stared at it for several seconds while a strange kind of anger started building inside me. Not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. Because right then I realized this wasn't an accident. Nobody accidentally brings excavation equipment onto private property. Nobody accidentally digs hundreds of feet across somebody else's ranch. And nobody accidentally buries a sewer line under land they don't own. Standing there in that trench under the beam of my flashlight, I realized somebody had looked at my family's ranch and decided it was easier to use it than respect it. What I didn't know yet was who had approved it. Who had signed off on it. Or how much that decision was about to cost them. And the next morning, I was going to find out. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that pipe sitting under my ranch like some kind of buried insult. Around 4 in the morning I gave up, made coffee, and sat on the porch watching the sun come up over the pasture. Usually mornings out there helped me think. The sight of the grass moving in the breeze, the sound of birds waking up, the smell of damp earth, it normally settled my nerves. That morning it only made me angrier. Because the more I thought about it, the less this looked like a mistake. This wasn't some contractor getting confused about a property line. You don't accidentally transport excavators onto private land. You don't accidentally dig a trench hundreds of yards long. You don't accidentally install infrastructure worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Somebody knew exactly what they were doing. By 8 o'clock I was sitting inside the county records office. The place looked exactly the same as it had for 20 years. Faded linoleum floors. Metal filing cabinets. Old coffee brewing somewhere in the background. Behind the front desk sat Martha Jennings. Martha had worked there so long she probably knew more about local property boundaries than most surveyors. The second she saw me carrying photographs, she raised an eyebrow. "Morning, Wade. Somebody sue you or somebody die?" I dropped the photos onto her desk. "Not sure yet." That got her attention. For the next couple of hours we dug through property maps, utility permits, easement records, construction filings, environmental approvals, everything we could find. The deeper we looked, the stranger things became. Because there was nothing. No easement. No utility agreement. No permission. No county approval. Nothing authorizing anybody to cross my property. Legally speaking, that sewer line might as well have been a stolen pickup truck parked in my barn. Martha leaned back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "Oh, somebody's having a bad year." Then we found something interesting. About 8 months earlier, Maple Ridge Estates had submitted plans for a major expansion. More homes. More lots. More development. The proposal had run into problems because the existing sewer capacity couldn't handle the additional houses. The county had rejected one of their routing plans due to cost concerns and environmental requirements. The approved alternative would have required expensive upgrades. Very expensive upgrades. Instead, somebody apparently found a shortcut. My ranch. As I drove home, one thought kept repeating in my head. They didn't think I'd notice. They honestly believed I was just some old rancher sitting out in the country, too disconnected to catch what they were doing. That realization irritated me more than the actual pipe. By lunchtime I was sitting inside the office of my attorney, Grant Holloway. Grant was one of those men who looked permanently tired until legal trouble appeared. Then suddenly he became the most alert person in the room. I spread photographs across his desk and explained everything. Halfway through the story, a smile started creeping across his face. By the end he was practically laughing. I stared at him. What's funny? He shook his head. Wade, do you have any idea what kind of mess they've created for themselves? I assume it's lawsuit territory. Oh, it's way beyond that. He stood and walked toward his bookshelf. If they crossed private property without authorization, installed utilities without easements, and connected an active sewer system, they're exposed from every direction. He started counting on his fingers. Trespassing. Unauthorized construction. Property damage. Environmental liability. Civil penalties. I nodded. So we sue? No. The answer came so quickly it caught me off guard. No? Grant sat back down. No. Why not? He leaned forward. Because if you sue right now, they'll panic, reroute the system, negotiate a settlement, write a check, and eventually move on. I frowned. That sounds fine. He smiled. No, Wade. Fine isn't what we're after. I knew that look. Grant had just spotted something. What are we after? He tapped one of the photographs. Leverage. I stayed quiet. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. Right now, every toilet in that neighborhood depends on infrastructure running through your property. I stared at him. He smiled wider. And they know it. For a moment the room was silent. Then slowly I started understanding. The pipe wasn't just evidence. It was leverage. Massive leverage. Grant spent the next hour explaining exactly how vulnerable Maple Ridge really was. If regulators got involved before they fixed the situation, construction could be halted. Home sales could be delayed. Property values could suffer. Insurance companies could start asking questions. Residents could start filing lawsuits. The HOA board could become public enemy number one. The more he explained, the clearer it became. Somebody had saved money by cutting through my ranch. Now that decision was about to become incredibly expensive. 3 days later came the monthly HOA meeting. Grant advised me not to warn them. Surprises create honesty, he said. That evening I put on a clean pearl snap shirt, drove into Maple Ridge, and parked outside their clubhouse. The building looked like somebody had tried to build a luxury lodge using ideas from a magazine. Stone columns. Perfect landscaping. Expensive lighting. The kind of place designed to impress people who needed impressing. Inside, about a dozen board members sat around a polished conference table discussing landscaping contracts. The moment I walked through the door, conversation stopped. At the head of the table sat Bradley Mercer, HOA president. Mid-50s. Expensive watch. Perfect haircut. The kind of man who always seemed to be campaigning for something. His smile appeared immediately. It disappeared just as quickly when he noticed the folder under my arm. "Mr. Collins," he said. "This meeting is private." I closed the door behind me. Good. Then I placed the photographs on the table. The room went silent. One board member gasped. Another leaned closer. Bradley looked down. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely nervous. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then he recovered. Men like Bradley always recover quickly. They're used to being in control. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." I almost laughed. A reasonable explanation for burying a sewer line under my ranch? Nobody spoke. I laid copies of the county records beside the photographs. No easement. More papers. No permits. Another stack. No authorization. The silence became heavier with every page. One woman quietly whispered, "Please tell me those aren't official records." Nobody answered her. Bradley finally cleared his throat. "There may have been a misunderstanding involving contractors." A younger board member looked at him. "Bradley, did we have approval?" Bradley ignored the question. I noticed that. So did everybody else. The room was starting to crack. People who thought they were all on the same team were suddenly realizing they might not be. Finally Bradley looked directly at me. "What exactly do you want?" There it was. The moment the balance shifted. 3 days earlier they were the neighborhood that thought my ranch was disposable. Now their president was asking me for terms. I slowly sat down at the table. Then I slid a thick folder toward him. Grant had prepared it the night before. Bradley opened it. His eyes moved across the first page. Then the color drained from his face. "What the hell is this?" I folded my hands. "A proposal." His eyes jumped back to the number again. Around the room several board members leaned over his shoulder. One by one, their expressions changed too. Shock. Disbelief. Panic. Because sitting there in black and white was the beginning of a deal none of them had expected. And for the first time since finding that pipe, I finally felt like I was holding all the cards. For a few seconds nobody said a word. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Bradley kept staring at the number on the page like maybe it would change if he looked long enough. Finally he looked up. $10,000 a month? I nodded. That's right. His face turned red. You've lost your mind. I shrugged. Maybe. But I wasn't the one who buried a sewer line under somebody else's ranch. A couple people at the table actually looked away. Not because they disagreed with me. Because they knew I was right. One of the board members, an older woman named Janet, carefully took the folder from Bradley and started reading through the agreement herself. The farther she got, the more serious she looked. 50-year utility access agreement, she murmured. Then she flipped another page. Automatic rate increases every 5 years. Another page. Full maintenance responsibility remains with the HOA. Another page. Environmental liability stays with Maple Ridge. By the time she finished, she slowly lowered the contract onto the table. Nobody needed to ask what she was thinking. The answer was written all over her face. This was expensive. Very expensive. Bradley slammed his hand onto the table. This is extortion. I couldn't help laughing. The irony was almost too much. Extortion? I said. You dug across private property, installed infrastructure you didn't own, and connected 300 homes to it without permission. I leaned back. Let's not pretend I'm the villain here. The room got quiet again. Then a younger board member finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. What happens if we don't sign? I looked directly at him. Tomorrow morning I contact the county, the environmental department, state regulators, and every local news station I can find. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Because they all knew exactly what would happen next. Investigations. Public hearings. Lawsuits. Construction delays. Property value problems. Potential shutdown orders. A complete disaster. I let that reality sit in the room for a moment. Then I added one more sentence. And until the issue gets resolved, every homeowner in this neighborhood gets to explain why their sewer system was built illegally. You could practically hear people calculating numbers in their heads. Hundreds of homeowners. Millions in property values. Years of legal headaches. Suddenly $10,000 a month didn't sound nearly as outrageous. Bradley stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward. You think because you own a ranch you can hold an entire community hostage? That sentence hit a nerve. Not because it offended me. Because it revealed exactly how he saw people like me. Just a rancher. Just some guy with dirt and fences. I stood too. Then I looked him right in the eye. My grandfather built that ranch with his own hands. The room went completely silent. He worked for every acre. My father protected it. I protected it. And somebody from this neighborhood decided they were entitled to use it because asking permission would have cost money. Nobody spoke. Even Bradley didn't. Because there wasn't really anything left to say. The facts were the facts. The law was the law. And everybody in that room knew it. The meeting ended without an agreement that night. But I could tell the fight was over. Not publicly. Not officially. But mentally. The board knew they were trapped. 3 days later Grant called me. I could hear laughter in his voice before he even spoke. They hired 3 separate law firms. I smiled. And? All 3 gave them the same advice. What advice? Pay the rancher. I won't lie. That felt pretty good. The following week Bradley drove out to my property himself. Watching his luxury SUV bounce down my dirt road was worth the entire experience. He stepped out wearing shoes that clearly weren't designed for mud. By the time he reached the barn, he already looked miserable. I was feeding horses when he arrived. I made no effort to hurry. Maybe that was petty. But after everything that happened, I felt entitled to a little pettiness. Eventually I walked over. Morning, Bradley. He looked exhausted. The confidence he'd carried at every HOA meeting was gone. The polished smile was gone too. All that remained was a tired man carrying a problem he couldn't solve. The board voted, he said. I nodded. And? We'll sign. Just like that. Months of arrogance reduced to 2 words. We'll sign. I wish I could tell you there was some dramatic speech after that. There wasn't. Real life usually isn't that theatrical. Most of the time people simply run out of options. Bradley glanced across the pasture. You really would have gone through with it? I knew what he meant. The regulators. The lawsuits. The media. All of it. I looked toward the old barn my grandfather built decades earlier. Then I answered honestly. Here's the funny thing. He waited. If somebody had knocked on my door 6 months ago and simply asked, we probably could have worked something out for almost nothing. For the first time since I'd met him, Bradley didn't have a response. Because deep down he knew exactly where everything had gone wrong. Greed. Arrogance. Assumptions. They assumed the rancher wouldn't notice. They assumed rural meant ignorant. They assumed ownership didn't matter if nobody complained. Every bad decision after that came from those assumptions. The contracts were signed a few days later at my kitchen table. 50 years. Monthly payments. Scheduled increases. Maintenance responsibility. Environmental protections. Everything documented. Everything legal. Everything above board. The way it should have been from the beginning. That evening I sat on my porch watching the sun drop behind the trees. The ranch looked exactly the same as it had the week before. Same fields. Same fences. Same barn. Same creek. Yet somehow it felt different. Maybe because for the first time I realized something. Protecting land isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about refusing to let people take advantage of you. Every month since then, Maple Ridge has sent a payment. Always on time. Always exactly as agreed. A few years later Bradley moved away. Word around town was that homeowners blamed him once details of the situation started circulating. I don't know if that's true. And honestly, I don't spend much time thinking about him. But every now and then I'll drive past that neighborhood and see families walking dogs, kids riding bikes, neighbors arguing over HOA rules nobody actually likes. And I can't help smiling a little. Because beneath all those perfect lawns and neat sidewalks sits a sewer line crossing my family's ranch. A sewer line they never should have built. A sewer line they absolutely should have asked permission for. And a sewer line that's still paying for itself all these years later. Now here's the question I want to leave you with. If somebody secretly used your property, your land, something your family spent generations building, and you had the chance to either destroy them in court or turn their mistake into a lifetime of income, what would you do? Would you choose principle? Would you choose profit? Or would you choose something in between? Let me know down in the comments because I've had this debate with friends for years, and people are surprisingly divided. And if you enjoy stories about property disputes, entitled neighbors, HOA drama, and ordinary people finding unexpected ways to fight back, make sure to subscribe and stick around. Because trust me, out in small-town America, situations like this happen a lot more often than most people realize.